Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. So thank you for the introduction. So welcome everybody to our third session. We're going to be talking about forgiveness. And I thought today we would start by way of a story from Thailand. And so this is a story about Ajahn Lee, who's a famous teacher. The English speakers probably know. I'm not sure if he's famous because a lot of the books haven't been translated to Chinese yet. So he was what they call a Tudong monk in Thailand, and we would call that a Charika monk in Sri Lanka. So this kind of a monk normally doesn't always stay in one spot. They would travel by foot from place to place for a large part of the year. So on this particular occasion, Ajahn Lee had decided to spend his Vasa in the northeast of Thailand, spending the Vasa there at a small monastery with a group of disciples. And after the Vasa, he heard that his father had fallen ill, and so he had made a plan to go back to visit him. Just around that time, he was making plans to leave. One evening, he was going out to do some teaching in the village, going out to teach meditation. And just as he was getting ready to leave the monastery, a group of about 100 squirrels rushed into the monastery. And not only that, they settled on the porch of a monk named Bante Yen. And Ajahn Lee saw this and he was a bit shaken. He thought, this is a bad sign, something odd is going to happen. So he gathered all the monks and he told them, look, please don't do anything tonight. Just go back to your kuti. If you have any business, you can do it another day. Just go back to your kuti. Don't talk to anybody. Meditate alone. And tomorrow we'll talk over, see if anything's happened. And after that, he went out and held his meditation session. Now, in the middle of the meditation session, two villagers rushed into the room. And they rushed in but seeing that everybody was meditating, they sat to one side and waited for the whole session to finish. And then they informed Ajahn Lee that Bante Yen had been stabbed. But fortunately, it wasn't too serious. And when they got back to the monastery, they found that pretty much right away, the police had found the suspect, a man named Na Yin. He's a local guy and his friend. When the police interrogated them, they found they wouldn't confess, but they were pretty sure these are the two guys behind it. So they decided to lock them up anyway. Ajahn Lee was pretty much, he knew this guy and he knew he was a bit of a hooligan, but he didn't think he was rotten through and through. And so he asked the police chief if he could talk with him, if the three of them could meet together. So they had a meeting. And so I'm going to quote from Ajahn Tanisro's translation of Ajahn Lee's autobiography here. If it's true that you're involved in this, I don't want you ever to do it again. No matter whether it's a case of a monk or a layperson, I want you to stop. If it's not true that you're guilty, then it means you're a good person. So today I'm going to ask the chief of police to give me Na Yin. From today onwards, I'll ask Na Yin not to cause the monastery any trouble. May the chief of police please let Na Yin go so that there'll be no more animosity between us. 大家好，欢迎参加我们2025年第三次的佛法讲座。让我们首先以一则发生在泰国的故事为开场。有一次，阿正离决意了在泰国东部度过愚人节。愚人节之后，因为他父亲生病了，他准备回家去探望父亲。当时有一件奇怪的事情发生了。当他快要离开森林道场，前往教导居士时，突然看见了一群100多只松鼠闯入了森林道场。 全部聚集在袁君之的疗房门廊前。阿珍妮从未见过松鼠有类似的行为，菜上会有意识发生。巫师告诫了住在森林道上的尊者们，傍晚回各自的谷地、各自的疗房独自禅修。告诫大家之后，阿珍妮才出外交禅。当阿珍妮在外交禅时，一村民匆忙跑进了屋子，但因害怕惊扰禅修大众，他极静静地坐在一边等禅修结束。等禅修教导结束后，他才向阿珍妮报告袁君之被人刺伤了，还好刺伤不严重。警察逮捕了一名叫那英的村民和他的朋友。经过警方审讯后，他们并未坦诚罪行，但警方仍准备将其收押。事实上，阿珍妮认识那英，虽是他是个流氓，但并非十恶不赦。据说，是一些住在村里的比丘雇佣他来吓跑阿珍妮和他的弟子们。他来过森林道上几次做些杂物，所以阿珍妮觉得那英虽涉案，但仍可教化。基于此，阿珍妮请求了警长允许他跟那英谈话。当三人见面时，阿珍妮问说：“如果你真是设计此案，我希望你今后不要再犯。不管对方是僧人还是居士，我都希望你停止。如果你是清白的，那就请证明你是个好人。所以我请求警长将你交给我。从今天起，我请求那英不要再给道场制造任何麻烦。”阿珍妮自传。So we've been talking about how to overcome anger in our previous talk, and also in our first talk we talked about right effort. Today we're talking about forgiveness, and so we have an example in our story just now, and I'm going to give an example from the Samyutta Nikaya. I think I'll start with reading the sutta from the Samyutta Nikaya. We have a translation here by Bhikkhu Bodhi. It's the Samyutta Nikaya. It's from the Sagata Vaga again. That's the first section of the Samyutta Nikaya. And it's the 35th sutta, so 135. In this sutta, it actually has two sections. In the first section, a group of devas come and they chant some verses to the Buddha. And after that, the Buddha corrects what they've said. Following on that, the devas apologize to the Buddha. And the Buddha smiles. So when they see him smile, they become upset and they think he's making fun of them or something. And then they chant another set of verses, which the Buddha responds to. So it's the second set of verses that we're going to hear now. If one does not grant pardon to those who confess transgression, angry at heart, intent on hate, one strongly harbors enmity. And the Buddha responds, if there was no transgression, if here there was no going astray, and if enmities were appeased, then one would be faultless here. And the Devata responds, for whom are there no transgressions? For whom is there no going astray? Who has not fallen into confusion? And who is the wise one ever mindful? And the Buddha responds, the Tathagata, the enlightened one, full of compassion for all beings. For him there are no transgressions. For him there is no going astray. He has not fallen into confusion. And he is the wise one, ever mindful. If one does not grant pardon to those who confess transgression, angry at heart, intent on hate, one strongly harbors enmity. In that enmity I do not delight. Thus I pardon your transgression. So when somebody in the suttas, when somebody goes and they ask forgiveness from the Buddha, usually the Buddha responds with a particular verse, where they would call it a pericope. I mean, so the Buddha would say, yes, it's true that you have done something wrong, but in this sasana, it counts as a sign of progress if you're able to admit your faults, and then he would accept their forgiveness. So in the Vinaya, if somebody comes to a monk, especially if one monk comes to another monk, they're required to give forgiveness to them. It's actually an offense if you don't forgive. But this forgiveness, it doesn't mean completely forgetting what happened. It means that you don't bring up the matter again and again. You don't criticize the person. You don't seek revenge. But it doesn't mean that your relationship with that person hasn't changed. And you remember what's happened, and you may have to act accordingly. Sometimes if somebody is an angry person or unreliable, then you might not be able to work with them in the future. So in Ajahn Lee's story, the situation is a little different because Ajahn Lee has come and he has decided to help out Na Ying, but Na Ying didn't confess his mistake. So he had been hired by the village monks to stab another monk. He had actually committed this, what we would call aggravated assault in some countries these days. And Ajahn Lee said, asked the police chief to let him go because he saw something in the character. He thought that this individual has a chance to change. So they have he's forgiven him and he has let him go. He's not actually obligated to do that. If he had just let the police put him in jail, that also would have been completely correct. So we don't know what would have been the best way, but it seems that Nayin didn't. He changed. He became a devoted follower of Ajahn Lee in the future. And so because of that, we can see maybe Ajahn Lee did make the right decision. 我们第一次讲座谈到了正精进，第二次我们谈到了如何对治嗔怒，今天我们来谈谈宽恕。在经典中，如果有人犯了错后向佛陀请求宽恕，佛陀会先回答说：“你确实犯了错，但能在修行之路坦诚自己的错误，就是一种进步。”当犯错者诚挚地认错，请求原谅，受害方只需要妥善地保持心平气和，没有复仇的行为。在今天的故事中，阿正里认为那英还有改过的机会，所以他适时地伸出援手来帮助他。结果之后，那英便成为了一位很热心的信徒。事实上，阿正里并没有义务出手协助，而是任由警察依法办事，将那英送进监狱。这样做，阿正里也并无过失，但这个结果也许会导致那英再犯罪。然而，如果是犯错者主动前来请求宽恕，那就不一样了。宽恕并不意味遗忘，但是我们不该对理不饶人的批判，心存报复。上次我们谈到了怎么征服嗔怒，也应在原谅他人的当下，同时征服傲慢。相应部1.35有以与此议题相契的故事。有一次，一群虔诚到舍卫城来祭见佛陀，并送寄语。送完了之后，佛陀就纠正了他们的错见。当天使们听到了佛陀的回答，他们即刻请求宽恕。就在那一刻，佛陀微笑了。看到佛陀的微笑反应，天圣们误会 并生气地说：天生问，如果你在别人承认错误后，仍不原谅他，心中充满愤怒和仇恨，你困在敌意之中。佛陀答：若无过犯，若无迷途，若敌意已平息，自此人无过犯，无过错。先生问：谁没有过犯？谁没有迷途？谁没有陷入过困惑呢？谁是永远执念的作者？佛陀答：如来等等觉者，对一切众生充满慈悲，他没有过犯，他没有迷途，他没有陷入困惑，他就是永远执念的作者。如果你在别人承认错误后，仍不原谅他，心中充满愤怒和仇恨，你被困在敌意之中。我不赞叹这种敌意，因此我原谅你的过犯。So sometimes forgiveness is hardest when it comes to reflecting on our own actions. And I picked out one story, very famous story from the Dhammapada, from Dhammapada 182 in this regard. And I think most of you have heard the story before. And this is the story of Irakapata Mahanaga. So in a past life, in the time of Kassapa Buddha, Irakapata was a monk, a young monk. One day he was traveling along the Ganges River, and he extended his hand and he grasped a reed at the riverbank. And now the boat was moving swiftly, but he didn't let go of the reed, and it broke off. Now, this is a small thing, but according to the monks' rules and the nuns' rules, we're not allowed to damage plants. It's what we call a pachitya offense. This sort of thing, if you do this sort of thing, you're required to discuss it and confess it to another monk, or for the nuns, in the case of the nuns, another nun. However, Irakapata was a young monk, and so he didn't do that. So he continued his meditation for a very long time, and eventually, as his life was coming to an end, he started to remember this event again and again. He started to obsess over it, and he realized that he had done this thing. It was wrong, but he didn't confess it. And as his life reached its end, that was the thought that led to his new birth, which was as this Naga, Irakapata. So Nagas are something like dragons, you can say. For those of you who don't really know about Nagas, they have some special powers. They're able to change form from snake form into human form, which is one of their primary powers, and they have some other psychic powers as well. In their human form, they're considered to be very beautiful. However, due to the nature of their rebirth, they're not able to make progress in their meditation. And so Erakapato was quite upset about this. And at that point, he didn't know what to do. He had been reborn in the Ganges. Not only that, the lifespan of a Naga is quite long. So he decided when the next Buddha were to arise in the world, he would want to meet him and get some advice. After a long time, he had a daughter. And when his daughter grew up to her teenage years, he realized he drew up a plan. And the plan was to give her a riddle that only a Buddha could solve. And anybody who would be able to answer that riddle could have her hand in marriage. So he set up a contest. Once a month, his daughter would dance on the banks of the Ganges River, and all the men would come and they would try to give an answer to this riddle. And now, for a long time, no one was able to answer it until one day, a young Brahmin named Uttara, he was heading to the banks of the Ganges, and he met the Buddha. And the Buddha pulled him aside and asked him what he was doing. He explained, "I'm going to see the dancing Naga woman." And the Buddha asked what kind of answer he was planning to give to her question, and he explained what it was, and the Buddha said, "No, I don't think she'll like that answer. Please give her this answer. If you give her this answer, then I think you'll win the prize." When he heard these verses, he was able to attain stream entry. So actually, I have the verses. We didn't prepare them in Chinese, but maybe for the English, I'll chant the verses very quickly. There are two sets of verses that he chants. We won't discuss the meaning of the verses. King Suadapati Raja, King Siraja Rajisaro, Katang Suvirajo Hoti, Katang Baloti Vuchati. What type of ruler is the king? What king is it ruled by passion? How may he become passionless? Who is called a foolish person? Chidvara Dipati Raja Ranjamano Rajisaro Arajang Virajo Hoti Rajang Baloti Vuchati. He who rules over the 6 doors is king. When attached, the king is ruled by passion. Being unattached, he is passionless. Attached, he is called a foolish person. So after giving that answer, the Naga maiden came up with another verse. Kena suvayati balo katang nudati pandito yonga kemi katang hoti tang me yakha hipuchitoti. By what is a fool swept away? How does a wise man drive away? How is there release from the yokes? Speak to me, answer my question. Ogena vayati balo yoga nudati pandito sambayoga visangyoto yoga kimi kivuchati. By the deluge is a fool swept away. By effort does a man drive away. Being unfettered from all the yokes, he is said to be released from the yokes. Translation by Bhante Ananda Jyoti and the scholar Burlingame. So we won't discuss the meaning of the verses today. If we get a chance in the future, we can discuss them. They have some technical meanings there. So the Brahmanuttara attained stream entry, and the Naga Erakapata, of course, he's not able to do that in that lifetime, but he was able to meet the Buddha as a means of his plan. So I think from his story, we can learn a few things. And one of them is, the first one is simply the reality that people have this nature. They'll do something small that they shouldn't have done. And at first they have this feeling it doesn't mean much, but after a long time, they slowly grows in their mind, grows in importance in their mind. And they have this kind of regret that has to be overcome. So the second thing that it brings up is when you're in a bad situation like Erakapata Naga, then you have to use what resources you have to overcome your difficulties. So he came up with a very clever plan. He was able to meet the Buddha. And although he was not able to attain path and fruition in that life, I think he's so determined, we can imagine he would eventually be able to attain that. 相对来说，宽恕自己有时候是最难的。这是一个与法举经第182集相关，阐述阿拉卡帕塔龙王的 前生因懊悔而障碍其灵性成长，而相当出名的例子。阿拉卡帕塔是迦叶佛时期的一名僧人。有一次，他乘船沿恒河出行时，他伸手抓住了岸边的一片叶子，尽管船速很快，他也没有松手。当这片叶子终被拉断时，他心想，这没什么大不了的。其实，蓄意破坏植物是僧人需要忏悔的轻罪。由于他是一名独居的年轻僧人，所以他没有向其他僧人忏悔自己的过错，仍旧继续禅修。所以经过很长时间，他的禅修进展却不理想。在他生命将结束时，他开始执着于很久以前这段叶子的反省。在他生命最后一刻，正在那，就是这种懊悔啊，导致他下一世结生为恒河中的龙王阿拉嘎巴塔。龙王虽拥有某些神通能力，但导致他结生的根本因阻碍他的禅修进展，这让他非常苦恼。他制定了一个计划，希望在下一尊佛出世时，他能与之相会。他交给他美丽的女儿一个只有佛陀才能解答的谜题，并宣布谁能正确的回答，可娶她为妻。最终，一位名叫乌特拉的年轻婆罗门从佛陀那里得到了答案。阿拉卡帕塔龙王也因此机缘而得见佛陀。故事中的寄送优美而深奥，我刚刚送的那些有机会我们可以单独探讨。可是而言，后悔却是一种对自己的嗔恨。依照阿毗达摩议论的解释，后悔是做错事后的忧虑和懊恼，其特征是事后的自责，其作用是对自己做或未做之事感到忧愁，其现其为懊悔，其今因是已做或未做之事。I missed one. In the English, I missed one section. So Bhikkhu Bodhi gives the Abhidhamma definition of this remorse, kukucca, in his comprehensive manual of Abhidhamma. So it's the translation of the Abhidhamma Sangaha. Kukucca is worry or remorse after having done wrong. Its characteristic is a subsequent regret. Its function is to sorrow over what has and has not been done. It is manifested as remorse. Its proximate cause is what has and has not been done. So we've come to a section about how to overcome these things, overcome this remorse. And one of the examples, mostly the examples that we can find in the suttas are aimed towards monks or nuns. And so this particular sutta in the Anguttara Nikaya, in the 5, sutta number 142, describes 5 sorts of people and how they should progress if they've done something wrong. And it's interesting. So the Buddha gives the fifth person. The fifth person is the idea of the fifth person is somebody who doesn't do anything wrong and they attain nibbana. So the goal of the other 4 is to attain nibbana. But you have the situation where one person does something wrong and they admit the wrong. One person does something wrong and they don't admit it. Another person doesn't do anything wrong, but they're still obsessed with it. They still feel this kind of remorse. So maybe a quote from part of the sutta here. This is Ajahn Sujato's translation. I won't read the whole thing. Mendicants. These 5 people are found in the world. What 5? One person transgresses and regrets it, and they don't truly understand the freedom of heart and freedom of wisdom, but where those arisen, bad, unskillful qualities cease without anything left over. One person transgresses and doesn't regret it, and then they don't attain nibbana. One person doesn't transgress and yet still feels regret, so they didn't do anything wrong, and they don't understand and realize nibbana. One person does neither, so they don't do anything wrong and they don't regret that, but they're also not able to attain nibbana. And so after that, after outlining the cases, the Buddha gives some advice how they should act in each case. So in the case where somebody's done something wrong, then they need to deal with that in according to the Vinaya. So earlier in the story of Erakapata, that particular monk, he just needed to confess what he had done. But there are some other kinds of offenses that are more serious. They might require some kind of further action to repair the mistake. Adapting to lay life, then in some cases, if you've done something wrong, no action is required. In other cases, you may need to ask forgiveness from somebody, and in another case, you may need to make recompense to somebody. Either way, the fault should be dealt with, and then you can continue with your meditation practice. In the case where somebody has not actually done something wrong, but they're still really worried about it, they need to be reassured. So especially for those who are, for the monks and nuns, the Vinaya rules can be very complicated. They can easily get some kind of doubt about whether they have committed an offense or not. And so this sort of situation is more common with those individuals. And there's actually a section later in the talk, the Buddha gives 6 ways of dealing with regret. That very much applies here. So we need quite a few tools in our toolkit if we want to overcome regret. So one of them is to practice Buddhanussati. So once we try to deal with something, but we still have some regret in our mind, we can try practicing Buddhanussati, reflecting on the Buddha, all of the difficulties that he went through in his practice, but in the end, he was able to overcome all suffering. So for some people, especially from a traditional Buddhist background, this can be very helpful. For other people, it might be more helpful to reflect on the workings of Kamma. So let's have a look at Lonapala Sutta, very famous sutta on this topic. This excerpt is from Ajahn Thanissara's translation. It is in the threes of the Anguttara Nikaya. It's sutta number 100. Suppose that a man were to drop a salt crystal into a small amount of water in a cup. What do you think? Would the water in the cup become salty because of the salt crystal and unfit to drink? Yes, Lord. Why is that? There being only a small amount of water in the cup, it would become salty because of the salt crystal and unfit to drink. Now suppose that a man were to drop a salt crystal into the Ganges River. What do you think? Would the water in the river Ganges become salty because of the salt crystal and unfit to drink? No, Lord. Why is that? There being a great mass of water in the river Ganges, it would not become salty because of the salt crystal or unfit to drink. In the same way, there is the case where a trifling evil deed done by one individual takes him to hell, and there is the case where the same sort of trifling deed by another individual is experienced in the here and now, and for the most part barely appears for a moment. Now, a trifling evil act done by what sort of individual takes him to hell? There's the case where a certain individual is undeveloped in body, undeveloped in virtue, undeveloped in mind, undeveloped in discernment, restricted, small-hearted, dwelling with suffering, A trifling act done by this sort of individual takes him to hell. Now, a trifling evil act done by what sort of individual is experienced in the here and now, and for the most part barely appears for a moment. There is the case where a certain individual is developed in body, developed in virtue, developed in mind, developed in discernment, unrestricted, large-hearted, dwelling with the immeasurable. A trifling evil act done by this sort of individual is experienced in the here and now, and for the most part, barely appears for a moment. So somebody who's reflecting on this sutta, sometimes just reflecting on this helps to overcome regret. One thing is that when we reflect on the sutta, it encourages us to continue our Dhamma practice so we can overcome any kind of negative karma we might have. Of course, we don't know what kind of karma we have accumulated in this long samsara. And so this sutta emphasizes especially this importance of mind, developing our mind, and that reduces the ability of that bad karma to ripen, but also the power of our good deeds to sort of, in a sense, drown out the bad deeds. If we have a chance, we will maybe discuss the workings of karma in more detail in a future talk. So the last quote I have today is from the commentary to the Satipatthana Sutta, and it gives 6 ways of dispelling regret, 6 ways of dispelling regret, especially for a monk, but we can adapt for lay people. Now I've prepared the translation, so this is my own translation here. Surely these 6 qualities lead to the abandoning of uddhacca, kukucca, so remorse, you can say. The first one is broad learning, bahusuttata, questioning, paripucchata, being expert in the Vinaya, sorry, this one. Vinaya pakatanyata, attending to elders, buddha sevita, having spiritual friends, kalyana mittata, and having beneficial discussion, sapaya kata. So this section of the commentary, it explains each of these terms. So broad learning is mentioned by mastering the meaning of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of the Nikayas. Uddhacca is abandoned. Second one, questioning, by frequent questioning of what is allowable and unallowable. So questioning about sila. 3, being expert in the Vinaya. So this is especially for monks, that it means just what it sounds like. Attending to elders by staying close to spiritually mature elders, elder monks it means here, in this case, having spiritual friends. And it gives the example of friends who have excellent mastery of the Vinaya, like Mahatera Upali, who is the foremost in Vinaya. And the 6th one is beneficial discussion, so discussion regarding what is allowable and unallowable. Again, more aimed at monks, but can be adapted to somebody who's suffering with some kind of regret, relate people who also suffering from some kind of regret. And now this passage, these things also apply when dealing with other hindrances. We don't have time to talk about it today. They also apply when developing our good qualities. So for example, being well learned or cross-questioning, all of these appear in different contexts. 在藏九度无极142经，佛陀解释了如何劝诫无众人。简单的说，如果有人犯了戒，先应依照戒律处罪，把错误处理好，在化解后悔后，再来培育定力和智慧。消除了后悔，就相当于宽恕了自己。那要怎么做呢？ 其中一个方法是休息或催念。佛陀在觉悟之前，在无量的过去生中，他也做过很多错事，经历了各种的烦恼，但他最终仍征服了所有的苦。另一个方法，即是心思业的运作。也许将来我们有机会可以在这个议题上做比较深入的探讨。现在我们先来看一下言语经等这部三集100经。假如人将一块盐团丢进了一小水杯里，你们认为怎样？那盐团会否令那杯水显得饮不下口吗？是尊，是会的。这是什么原因呢？是尊，因为那杯中的水量很少，那块盐团会令那杯水显得饮不下口。现在，假如有人将一块盐团丢进恒河水里，你们认为怎样？那块盐团会否令恒河水显得饮不下口吗？师尊，不会。这是什么原因呢？师尊，因为恒河的水量很多很多，那块盐团不会令恒河水显得饮不下口。同样的，有些人即使只做轻微的恶业，但也会导致投生在地狱之中。有些人同样做的轻微的恶业，但只在现生之中细收回细小的报，而没有大恶报。那么，什么人即使只做轻微的恶业，也会导致投生在地狱之中呢？一些人不修身、不修戒、不修心、不修慧的人，他们没有德行，他们心灵素质低，遇到小事也会生气苦恼。这些人即使只做轻微的恶业，但会导致投生在地狱之中。那么，什么人同样做了轻微的恶业，但只在现生之中收回细小的报，而没有大恶报呢？一些修身、修戒、修心、修慧的人，他们有德行，心灵素质高，心胸广大，不可限量。这些人同样做了轻微的恶业，但只在现生之中收回细小的报，而没有大恶报。心思反复心思这部经文会帮助我们精进培养戒、定、慧三学。如有反复懊悔习气的人，需要更积极的计划，善用时间，造作更多的善业。在译句中提供了6种征服懊悔的建议：广学经文、善问、掌握戒律、亲近者会者、结交善友、时时讨论与律。那今天就聊到这里，我就希望大家能培养定慧，马上就一正涅槃。So those were the main points for today. So I hope that everybody is able to overcome all of this regret and remorse, and that they're able to attain nibbana as quickly as possible. I think we'll end the main talk and see if there are any questions today.
Okay. Thank you, Bante, for your teaching today. So, so we'll briefly go over the procedure for asking the questions. Feel free to submit your questions in the Q&A or chat, and try to keep it clear and concise as much as possible. And Bante will answer all the questions within the available time. Any unanswered questions will be answered in the coming teaching. So feel free to, again, submit the questions in the Q&A on Zoom. Okay, so if there's no questions, let's see if there's any. I don't believe there's any questions in the Q&A. Okay, so if there's no questions, Bhante, maybe you can lead us in sharing merits, making aspirations, please. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Idam me punyam
Idam me bunyam
asavakaya
asawakaya
vahang hotu.
vahang hodu.
Idam me punyam
Idam me bunyam
nibbanasa
nibbanasa
pachayo hotu.
pachayo hodu.
Mama punya bhagam
Mama punya bhagam
sambasatanam
sabasatanam
bhajimi
bhajemi
te sambe
de sabe
me samang
me samam
punya bhagam
punya bhagam
labantu.
labandu sadhu
Sadhu, sadhu,
sadhu
sadhu.
sadhu. Thank you again, Bante, for your teaching. And Bante, please feel free to leave Zoom at your convenience. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Okay.
And we just have a few announcements to make. Bante Jinaratana's next teaching, lesson 4, will be in September. It'll be the same time on Sunday, September 7 evening in the US and Monday, September 8 morning in Asia. Next week, it will be Sayadaw U Kumara Vibhansa's teaching on the Buddha and his great disciples on third great disciple, Venerable Kandanya. It will be half hour earlier on Saturday, August 23rd evening in the US and Saturday, August 24th morning in the Asia. So it will be half hour earlier than our usual schedule. Sincere thanks to Sister Paulina Su and Sister Melody Tan producing the English and Chinese captions to Venerable Jinaratana's teaching. The captioned videos are available on Pa'ao Georgia YouTube now. And please check out our YouTube channel and please follow us on Facebook. Any further suggestions and inquiries, please feel free to email us. Thank you everyone for your time and participation. May all of you be well, healthy, and happy. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.